So in this recording, we're going to be looking at the section at the end of Act 2 of An Inspector Calls, what I've referred to here as Sybil's story. It goes from the moment at which Gerald leaves right through to the very end of the act, so the focus is on what Sybil has done. This is the penultimate story of a member of the family as to how that they've affected Eva Smith. And of course, remember, it is the only one that is out of sequence chronologically. So the only time that we're told something ahead of the thing that happened before it, which of course is what happened with Eric. And that's obviously done for dramatic reasons here. So we're going to focus in on sections of this in particular, and how Priestley uses those to deal with Sybil's character, to deal with the dramatic, particularly in this case, the dramatic elements of the moment as well. So let's start with the fact that it's established very quickly on that Sybil is a liar, and she is the only liar as well. She's the only character in the play that we meet who lies at all. Okay, Arthur is just very clear that what he's done, he tells the truth, but what he's done is no problem. Gerald tries to avoid telling the truth. He does this with Sheila, if you remember. He, when asked, how did you know Eva Smith? I didn't. Well, all right, Daisy Renton then. What made you think I knew her? Things like that. So he tries to avoid telling the truth, but he never actually blatantly lies. The only other character who we hear of lying is Eva Smith, and that's a different matter. So in this section, when she's revealed as a liar, what we really see is her selfishness, Sybil's selfishness. I think in this story, what comes over is, which has come over in the rest of the plays, that Sybil thinks she is a really moral character, okay? She thinks that she has a very good sense of right and wrong, and she expects people to stay to it. But of course, her morality is slightly skewed. It's based on kind of surface things, things such as respect and paying the right amount of homage to her, depending on what social class you come from, for example. So if we look at the beginning here, let's start with when she's shown the photograph, and in the stage directions it's made very clear here that she looks hard at the photograph. So it's obviously, you know, we see that she recognises it, and that's something that we're going to get there. But also the fact that she looks hard at it does kind of suggest a reaction. She recognises the person straight away, which I suppose tells you what effect her encounter with Eva has had on her. But is the looking hard at it a sense of realising what she's done wrong at that particular moment? Well, if it is, it's interesting that then her immediate reaction is, yes, to lie, but also to become defensive. Now, as well as lying, remember, she then goes at the inspector for accusing her of lying. So she lies, and then when someone says she's lying, she says, well, you'll apologise for that, for saying that I'm lying. And it's interesting, the inspector isn't fazed by this at all. His response to being told to apologise by Arthur Burling actually is, for what? Doing my duty. And this word will come into this section repeatedly, as it does throughout the play, my duty. Okay? And the inspector's got a point here. But you can see what comes across is that Sybil does expect apologies for him doing his duty, because his duty only matters when it doesn't bother her. Now, we're with another inspector one here, following this up, when Burling responds to that question with no, for being so offensive about it, I'm a public man, and he cuts across him with what I often refer to as the Spider-Man line. You know, with great power comes great responsibility. Public men have responsibilities as well as privileges. And I think it's a really, really important one. I mean, it's something that you can imagine Priestley really wants to get across to us. That idea, yeah, you might have privileges, for being in your position, but you have responsibilities at the same time. It's a political statement. Down towards the bottom of the page, while Mrs. Burling is still not admitting anything, Sheila goes off on one and basically sums up what's happened to Eva Smith so far. And what I think it's worth noticing is the language that she uses. And that's what we've got here. She talks about how father threw this girl out. Again, as though it's an aggressive and dismissive action. And he did it because she asked for decent wages. Again, the word decent, just making the point, is not extravagant what she's asking for. Thrown out because she asked for decent wages. Just good enough. Then talks about herself pushing her father out. So again, a quite physical, aggressive metaphor here, really. And she gives her the reason that I was angry and she was pretty. So she really does sum it up and bring it to its basics. So through, decent, pushed, I was angry, she was pretty. And then gets to Gerald, who dropped her when it suited him, which is a really good, summary of the main problem, really, of what Gerald did, despite his supposed feelings towards her. So, at this point, we have another example, really, of when Priestley kind of delays dealing with something. Sybil's recognised the photograph. The inspector has called her out for lying. And then we've gone off to a side now about, responsibilities and privileges and duties and the like. What's interesting then is that when all this is said by Sheila, there is no comment by Mrs. Burling at this point, no comment by Sybil. And then as the inspector starts to question her, she continues with, well, it's not so much lying as a kind of almost petty avoidance. This thing where she doesn't reply in the stage directions is a response to being asked if she's a member of the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation. It's a factual thing, and she doesn't reply. It's like a child, really, isn't it? So why she's doing it is because, again, it's the attempt to avoid confronting what she knew when she looked hard at the photograph. Yet when he then says it's an organisation to which women in distress can appeal for help, she then does reply. And the reason is this: dignity. If she's able to say something with dignity, and here she thinks she is, helping deserving cases, then she will reply, she will speak. Dignity is part of that morality that she feels she's got, being dignified. But when you stop and think about dignity, really it's a bit like pride, I suppose. It's as much a bad thing as a good thing at times. It doesn't necessarily say anything particularly positive, certainly not to anybody else, showing dignity. Okay, so we move on then into the story itself, where I've put Pride and Prejudice there as a little connection because, she shows her prejudice very obviously, and in fact admits to it, and tries to hold on to her pride in who she is. Basically, what I think Priestley is trying to show us in this is that to Sybil, Eva is a different species. I've said elsewhere that I think the thing with Sybil is that she's not given maybe as hard a time as Arthur is, because she is brought up the way she is. She's a cold woman. She's had everything taken out of her by her upbringing in her class. And yet she genuinely doesn't think of Eva as a fellow female, a working class girl, like just a completely different group, type of person. So what do we get here when she's telling the story? This is when she's referring to using the name Mrs. Burling, which of course we know the irony comes clear of this, that she's only using the name because it's Eric who's the father, so she's taking his his name, and of course if she hadn't used that name she probably would have got the money, etc, etc, etc. But at the same time, of course, we're also aware that even if this was true, then who cares? That's the charity isn't there to refer and respond for people who are morally sound or who are polite to others. And again, it's that word impertinence, which came up much earlier in the play, and seems to be Sybil's catchphrase. Remember, impertinence is rudeness, so again she's focusing on this kind of surface morality that she sees, but it's a particular kind of rudeness, a rudeness that comes from not showing proper deference to somebody above you. So it's impertinent to say that to somebody who is in my position, okay? And she adds in quite deliberate, which is a ridiculous thing. Why would it be deliberate? Why would she walk in and deliberately use Mrs. Burling's name when she's trying to get money from a charity? It doesn't make any sense what Sybil's saying, but it focuses in on those core beliefs of her. How dare somebody use my name? Others have suggested, that she's very sensitive about her name because she's taken on this working class name, Mrs. Burling, from Arthur. But yeah, it's possible. But there you are. The inspector, of course, uses the phrase prejudiced, invites her to confirm it herself, and she does. So she is really quite clear and able to say, yes, I am prejudiced. And the reason that she gives is not good enough, is it really? I didn't like her manner. Why are you prejudiced against her? It's just the way she spoke, the way she behaved, the way she came over. Like with the impertinence, again, it's very much a focus on behaviour, on perceptions of behaviour. She carries on and points out that the story she told at first was quite false. And she's using this, remember, as an example of why she didn't deserve to get the money, get the help that she had. She, and also Mrs. Burling wants to say, it didn't take me long to get the truth, or some of the truth, out of her. But this surely reminds us that only, a few minutes earlier, we heard Sybil lie. Tell the wrong story at first. She is now telling us about her encounter with a girl who a few minutes ago she said she didn't recognise. So she's criticising again somebody for what she's done. Yes, hypocritical, but I think to her, again, the idea is, well, I did it for a reason. This is just what you'd expect from someone like her. But the point with the inspector is that he continues to push her. And this phrase, when she says, I'm not going to discuss this, I don't think we need to discuss what's going on. You have no hope of not discussing it. Really kind of shows the position that Sybil's really in compared to her behaviour. Yet her response to it is amazing. You think that she is supposedly being very, very defensive and, telling the inspector where to go, and she'll later on say that she never gives in to him, even though she clearly does. Here, for the first of two times she does this, she throws her family under the bus. After you've no hope of not discussing it, if you think you can bring any pressure to bear upon me, you're quite mistaken. And then she goes, unlike the other three, I did nothing I'm ashamed of. So she's basically saying Gerald, Sheila and my husband did things that they can be ashamed of. I didn't. Throwing them under the bus. A bit like Arthur did earlier when he, got relieved that the inspector was there to see other people apart from him. And then this duty phrase comes back. I consider I did my duty. Remember, we just looked at apologise for what? Doing my duty. So it's kind of, Priestley's pairing the two things up. What they consider their duty is. Now, from Mrs. Burling's point of view, her duty apparently here is to not give the girl money because her manner and her impertinence and apparently her telling a false story to begin with. Consider that idea of what duty is. But she's never going to get away with this. The inspector makes quite clear, not only you did something terribly wrong, which again goes back to that looking hard at it. I think pretty much she knows that, but she just won't accept it in her own head. You're going to spend the rest of your life regretting it. One of the first times really here where he really goes to the consequences that he's going to make a big deal of in the next act. So, having got this idea of her seeing, Eva as another species, really, the fact that she can't actually identify with her at all, which shows something about her background, as we say. It moves on to a point where now the tension begins to boil over and everybody gets angry. I say for all three characters, I know Sheila's there as well, but I'm referring to Sybil, Arthur and the inspector. It really, because this is the climax, obviously, of the play as it comes towards it. The inspector has pushed her to a point where she is angry and trying to really push home, and he gets to a point where she feels she has won and pushed her point over, and that's what she goes for here. Look for the father child is his responsibility. Of course she's been backed into the corner, but notice that word responsibility, just like duty, is coming up again and again and again. Having denied her responsibility, she pushes the responsibility unknowingly onto her son. But when they find out that Eva was pregnant, the inspector really pushes this. This is really getting quite emotive here. You've had children. You must have known how she was feeling. I mean, as in so many situations like this, when something really, really difficult to deny or react to happens to Mrs. Burling, she just says nothing. She just keeps quiet, and that's exactly what she does here. Instead, what we do is we get the response of the others. We get Sheila reacting to this, calling it cruel and vile. Now, that's a really, really harsh phrase. As I've said elsewhere about Sheila, Sheila doesn't actually turn on her family. She wants to defend them all the way through this, even through to the end of the act. She's trying to stop her mother from pushing herself into a corner. She wants them to see the truth. She wants them to accept it like she has done. But here is the first time she really actually is quite unpleasant to her. What you did was cruel and vile. And then, the second half of that, like typical Arthur reaction. If Sheila sees it for its moral shortcomings, the way she does, he sees it, of course, for his reputation, that the press might easily take it up. But it is also the only time really in the play he goes against his wife. So it reaches that tension where they're going to go off to the side. But of course, what does she do in response to them? She throws them under the bus again, particularly her husband here. Please remember, before you start accusing me of anything again, that it wasn't I who had her turned out of her employment, which probably began it all. So she really turns on Arthur and blames him, just like she throws at the father. That's how she reacts. Push away the responsibility all the way through. Throw anyone else under the bus. As she carries on, and it's pushed into this idea of the theft, which gives her a reason for doing what she's doing, we get back to this idea that she's a different species. Ridiculous airs, claiming elaborate fine feelings and scruples that were simply absurd in a girl in her position. Now, we know the inspector then goes on about, well, her position is she's dead on a slab. But the point here, out of what Sybil's saying, is that to her, a girl like Eva, and particularly a girl who is in desperate straits like her, there is no way that she would have any feelings and scruples beyond the obvious, the straightforward idea. Her feelings are good, bad. People like her don't have elaborate, fine feelings, distinctions in their feelings, subtleties to their feelings. They don't have scruples, morals. They can't be moral. She can't understand. I suppose many of us would find it hard to understand why she would refuse the money in her situation, refuse marriage in her situation. But it is a moral choice. And Sybil can't accept that, refuses to accept it. And the anger builds to the point at which Burling attempts to intervene and get back at the inspector after he says her position now is that she lies out, burnt out inside in the slab, following on from this, with the burnt out insides in the slab. He tries to object, and the inspector finally, his dismissal of Arthur has been building the whole way through. And here it comes out. Don't stammer and yammer at me again, man. I'm losing all patience with you people. And I remember he started calling him sir. He's now calling him man. Ordering him out. I mean, that's quite something. Stammering and yammering. That's what you do to me. You know, again, really dismissing most of what he's saying. But the most interesting thing is referring to them as you people. Distinguishing himself from them. And in this thing with Sybil, Sybil's being used as somebody, I think, here to bring it to the height that it's at. You people are going to the limits here by not accepting and not understanding what's going on. And a very, very commonly used one, again, same as the elaborate fine fittings and scruples, as if a girl of that sort would ever refuse money. That sort. Working class, poor. Sybil cannot understand that a poor person would ever refuse money for any situation. Again, she cannot understand the scruples. So throughout this section, we've got it building up towards that final, the climax. And this is when the truth absolutely destroys both Arthur and particularly Sybil. Okay? In building it to the climax, she comes to a point where she refuses, it says, I accept no blame. I'm sorry she came to a horrible end. I accept no blame. Okay? Again, the inspector, as we know, is managing it totally to make it clear. When then confronted with the idea that the father had stolen money to do so, then he's entirely responsible. So again, she's placing the blame unknowingly. I'm not to blame, it's completely the father, it's completely my son, even though she doesn't know that. It carries on and builds up, and we've got this. But again, this point here, when she talks about dealing severely with his father, look what she considers the worst punishment he could have. It is to confess in public. So like her husband, that is the worst thing she can imagine happening to somebody. Confessing in public. Reputation is all to them. And then we're back to the duty. This is when she says to the inspector, you know, you need to go off, make sure this happens, make sure the public confession happens, make an example of the young man. That is your duty. Of course, on the one hand, she is, as we know, telling him to stay there. She doesn't know it, to stay there and destroy her son. But we've gone from that idea of him saying his duty is asking questions, why should he apologise for it? Her saying she did her duty in the way she dealt with Eva. And now her saying, no, this is your duty to do this. She is condemning herself with her own words, but we're once again blame, responsible, duty. It's all in the same thing. And then, of course, it clicks. Okay? And what happens? Well, I've often thought that the thing you notice most about Sybil is how eloquent she is. She can always speak. She can always form a sentence. Okay? She's comfortable talking. But here, her language breaks down totally. And this is, of course, when she realises it's Eric. And to me, this is where, having had the standard thing of, you know, Sybil and her inability to cope with who Eva is and understand her slightly, we see that possible other side to her. The fact that her son does mean a lot to her. Throughout the play, although Eric has been on the receiving end of her telling off, her feelings for her son are such that she only really ever tells him off as part of a duo with Sheila. Sheila gets it in the neck from Sybil regularly, but Eric only really, up to this point, ever does when it's you two. So she's destroyed by this, and this will continue into the beginning of Act 3, where her language is completely gone. Arthur as well, for the first time, after all his aggression towards Eric, now refers to him as my boy. An almost tender moment, but again one with the terrified at the beginning that shows how much he means to Arthur, really. And it's brought to the end here, really, with Mrs. Burling's last line in the act. I don't believe it, I won't believe it. Again, her attempt to push away everything like she's done so far. I won't believe what's going on. But she has been destroyed by the truth, and of course the inspector's made her do it herself. So, there are things for all characters in here, but the key with Sybil in this section is very, very much the idea that I keep putting across, that she is a Victorian middle-class woman, and she is trapped by her upbringing as a Victorian middle-class woman. And what we see here is that her only response to having done something wrong is a combination of lying and denying, with constantly saying, I was right, I was right, I was right, whatever happens. And of course that breaks down in the end. Now, there's no doubt that this is a broader idea that Priestley's trying to get across to us, that the inspector has shown to us that the middle class just will not take responsibility for what they do, will either deny they've done it or will constantly point out that they are right. And you might well think to this day you get an awful lot of people behaving like this. Next, we go into Act 3. Eric is broken, and so is his mother.